Hi guys, my name is Sarah Frank and I'm a pre-nursing student in college. And today I wanted to make a video to help give you some tips and tricks to remember all of the little projections and holes and grooves that are on bones. If you are watching this video, you most likely have a bone quiz coming up. That's why I'm making this video for you all, because my lab bone quiz is tomorrow. And I wanted to give y'all a couple of tips and tricks that I use to help remember the bones and make naming all the bones in the body a whole lot easier. Before I forget, if you are in Collin College's pre-nursing program, or if you're in anatomy and physiology, taking anatomy and physiology at Collin College, you are most likely using some version of this book. This is Pearson's Anatomy and Physiology 11th edition lab manual. And if you're in another nursing program and you do not have this book, I will link it down below and put it as a reference. So anatomy is basically just a very fancy, glorified way of naming very simple things. And I want to give you an example real quick. So the infraorbital foramen, if you say it like infraorbital foramen, it sounds very fancy and very scholarly, so that when doctors write their research papers, they can sound all smart and highfalutin and whatever. But it actually, infraorbital foramen literally means, if you break it down, infra means under, orbital means eye socket, and foramen means hole. So infraorbital foramen literally means hole underneath the eye. But it doesn't sound quite as fancy and scholarly as infraorbital foramen, especially when it comes to those PubMed papers, you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to help break down some of those very fancy scholarly terms for you, so it helps to make naming bones throughout the rest of the body easier. So first of all, we're going to go over places where muscles and ligaments attach. And one of those places is called a tuberosity. And according to our fancy Pearson, it says a tuberosity is a large rounded projection. Tuberosity. It kind of almost sounds like, think of a potato. A potato, another word for a potato is a tuber, right? And a tuber is kind of a roundish, not irregular shaped vegetable, root vegetable. And it's rough because it's been in the soil and stuff like that. So you could think of tuberosity as a tuberosity, so like a potato osity. Or another way you could think of it is a tuberosity. You could replace tuber with tumorosity, if that makes sense, because a tumor is kind of a large, rounded, irregular, rough-ish projection off something like your skin or some organ or somewhere that's not supposed to be there. The next place where muscles and ligaments attach is called a crest. And I couldn't think of a special way to remember this other than I envision the pelvis, and the crest is like the heart-shaped part of the pelvis up there. So a trochanter is a very large, blunt, kind of triangular spike almost off of a bone. How I like to remember trochanter is when you spell it out, trochanter kind of looks like Trojan. So, and when I think of Trojan, I think of like gladiators and the Trojan War and weaponry. A trochanter is a very large, blunt, irregularly shaped process, and Trojans most likely used large, blunt weapons in warfare. So that's kind of how I like to remember it. Trojan, trochanter, put them together, there you go. Blunt, irregularly shaped, almost weapon-like. You could probably do some damage with this process off of a bone. A line is basically the same thing as a crest, it's just a little bit smaller. A tubercle is basically, I remember that the same way as a tuberosity. A condyle and an epicondyle are just a rounded part. I don't really know a cute way to kind of memorize that, but just remember that a condyle is a round part and it sits at the end of a long bone. So next up, we're going to be talking about spines and processes. Spines and processes are both very similar, as they're both projections that kind of shoot off bones. But the biggest difference between them is a spine is smaller and pointier than a process. So basically, how you differentiate spine and process in your head is spine starts with the letter S. So you can think spine, small, both start with the letter S, and process and prominent. Process, prominent, both start with P. So that's how you can remember that. They're easy to get mixed up. Next up, we're going to move on to places where bones help form joints. A facet. And just like spine and process, you can remember facet by thinking facet and flat both begin with the letter F. A facet is a very flat spot where two bones come together. So facet, flat, both begin with F. So that's how you can remember that those two go together. A ramus is an arm-like bar of a bone. So it's spelled R-A-M-U-S. So it's like ram us. R-A-M, ram us. And if you ram your arm into a door, it's going to hurt. So a ram us is an arm-like bar of a bone. And if you ram your arm into a door or a bar, it's going to hurt. So that's kind of how you can remember that a ramus looks like an arm. So next we're going to talk about places where blood vessels and nerves go through. Fissure. Pearson says it is a narrow slit-like opening. Here's my trick to remember this. Think about a fish. A fish, when you think about it, is pretty like this is my fish right here. So think about a fish. It's not wide. You don't see any fish that are wide. You see fish that are narrow. And a fissure is a narrow slit-like opening. So think about fissure like this. A fissure is a narrow slit-like opening that a fish, which is a narrow-bodied animal, can swim through. So hopefully that makes sense and helps. A couple other random little bone things to remember are a meatus, a sinus, and a fossa. And a sinus, that's easy to remember when you get a sinus infection. It's those little holes right here. I just recently recovered from one, and they fill up with snot and bacteria and get all gross. So sinuses are usually pretty easy to remember. But a fossa, Pearson defines it as a shallow basin-like depression in a bone, often serving as an articular surface. And articular just means two bones come together. So how I like to remember fossa is it's considered a basin-like part of the bone. And think about fossa. Fossa sounds like fossil, right? Fossa, fossil. And what do you have to do to get a fossil? You have to dig. You have to dig into the ground. And when you dig into the ground, what do you make? You make a basin. So to get a fossil, you have to dig a shallow depression in the earth. And that's a fossa. That's what a fossa is in your skull and other parts of your body. And the last one is a meatus, which is like, a meatus is almost like an alleyway for blood vessels, and a canal or an alleyway for blood vessels and nerves. So the way I like to remember a meatus is kind of like the shady, like, meet me in a dark alleyway kind of deal. You know what I'm saying? Because a meatus is almost like, it looks like an alleyway. So you can remember meatus, meet us in a dark alley. So those are all the bone markings. I wish you guys the best of luck on your quiz. Hopefully this helped, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.
So we're gonna kind of break down some of those very fancy scholarly terms for you, so it helps make naming bones easier throughout the body. This will help.